Hello everyone. Welcome to Realist Quill. Like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching now? Dr. James Harlow never believed in the supernatural. As a geology professor specializing in mountain formations, he'd spent decades exploring remote locations with nothing but science to guide him. Even when his colleagues shared campfire stories of strange phenomena in isolated places, James remained the skeptic, always finding the rational explanation. That unshakable belief in reason was being severely tested as he approached the third hour of driving through Blackwater Tunnel. It had begun as a routine trip. James was returning from a research expedition in the Appalachians, taking the scenic route through Virginia's mountains rather than the congested interstate. A detour sign had redirected him onto a narrow road he didn't recognize. Unusual, since James prided himself on knowing these mountains intimately. After winding through increasingly remote terrain, the road led to a tunnel entrance carved directly into the mountainside. Blackwater Tunnel, 1923, read the weathered sign. James had never heard of it, but that wasn't entirely surprising, given how many old mountain passages had been abandoned after the interstate system was built. The tunnel looked functional if outdated, a single lane of cracked concrete disappearing into darkness. James checked his GPS, which indicated this was indeed the fastest route back to the university. With a shrug, he drove into the tunnel's gaping mouth, headlights illuminating bare rock walls reinforced with ancient timber supports. The first odd detail James noticed was the complete absence of modern safety features. No reflectors, no emergency phones, not even a painted center line. The second was how quickly his radio dissolved into static, followed by his cell phone losing all signal. Still, none of this was particularly alarming for a century-old mountain tunnel. It was the impossible length of the passage that first triggered James's unease. According to his dashboard clock, he'd been driving at a steady 35 mph for nearly 20 minutes without seeing any indication of an exit. No mountain in this region was wide enough to justify a tunnel of such length. When he finally spotted a mile marker embedded in the wall, James slowed to read it. Mile 7. That was impossible. The entire mountain range here wasn't wide enough to accommodate a 7-mile tunnel. Yet when James checked his odometer, it confirmed he had indeed traveled over 7 miles since entering. Deciding to turn back, James slowed and executed a careful 3-point turn in the narrow space. As he drove back the way he came, his growing sense of relief was short-lived. After 15 minutes of driving, he should have reached the entrance, but the tunnel stretched endlessly ahead, identical rock walls, offering no indication he was making any progress. When James next passed a mile marker, it still read miles. Fighting rising panic, James accelerated, pushing his sedan faster through the darkness. The tunnel responded by seeming to elongate, the walls stretching like taffy in his peripheral vision. The air inside the car grew noticeably colder despite the heater running at full blast. 3 hours had now passed since he entered what should have been at most a 1-mile tunnel. James's fuel gauge had dropped from nearly full to under a quarter tank. The rational part of his mind suggested he was driving in circles somehow, yet the tunnel had no branches or turns to explain such a phenomenon. When his headlights illuminated a figure standing directly in his path, James slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop, mere feet from what appeared to be a man in outdated work clothes, coveralls and a hard hat that might have been appropriate in the night. The worker didn't react to the near collision. He stood perfectly still, head bowed, face hidden beneath the brim of his hard hat. In his right hand he held what looked like an old mining lantern, its flame burning with an impossible blue light. "Excuse me," James called through his partially opened window, voice echoing strangely in the tunnel. "I seem to be lost. Can you tell me how to get out of this tunnel?" Slowly the worker raised his head. Where a face should have been, there was only smooth, blank skin interrupted by a single dark opening where the mouth should be. When it spoke, the voice emanated not from this opening but from the walls of the tunnel itself. "No one leaves Blackwater," the voice rumbled, dust and small stones shaking loose from the ceiling. "Not since the collapse." "What collapse?" James asked, his scientific mind still desperately searching for logical explanations. Even as cold sweat soaked his shirt. In answer, the worker pointed his lantern toward the ceiling. James's eyes followed the gesture, and for the first time, he noticed what should have been immediately obvious. The roof of the tunnel was completely caved in about 50 feet ahead. Massive boulders and timber creating an impenetrable wall. 37 men, the faceless worker said, his voice now coming from directly behind James, despite the figure still standing visible in front of the car, all buried alive. The company sealed both ends rather than pay for recovery. James whipped around to find the back seat empty, then turned forward again to see the worker now stood beside his driver's window. Featureless face, inches from the glass. "We need new workers," the voice whispered, now directly in James's ear. "The tunnel must be expanded. It's our way out." The worker's gloved hand passed impossibly through the closed window, icy fingers wrapping around James's wrist. At that touch, James's perception shifted violently. Suddenly, he could see the full truth of Blackwater Tunnel. Not just the empty passage his headlights revealed, but the spectral overlay of dozens of men working endlessly in the darkness, their tools passing through solid rock without effect, their forms flickering like bad television reception. All of them had the same featureless faces, all turned toward him with the synchronicity of a single organism. "Your turn to dig," the voices said in unison as the car's engine died, plunging the tunnel into darkness except for the eerie blue glow of those impossible lanterns now surrounding his vehicle. 3 days later, park rangers found James Harlow's abandoned car just off Mountain Route 16. Keys in the ignition, driver's door open. There was no tunnel entrance anywhere in the vicinity. James's colleagues organized extensive search parties, but no trace of the geologist was ever found. 6 months after his disappearance, a highway construction crew uncovered the sealed entrance to an old mining tunnel while widening Route 6. Historical records identified it as Blackwater Tunnel, the site of a devastating collapse in 1923 that killed 37 workers. The company had indeed sealed both ends rather than attempt recovery of the bodies. When investigators entered the newly opened tunnel, they found it extended barely 50 yards before ending at a collapse site. On the wall just before the cave-in, freshly carved into the rock face despite the tunnel being sealed for nearly a century, they discovered a message: James Harlow, Mile 7, still digging. The tunnel was resealed with concrete and the highway rerouted. Local drivers report that GPS systems still occasionally attempt to direct travelers through the non-existent Blackwater Tunnel. Those who follow these directions inevitably find themselves on dead-end forest roads with no tunnel in sight, a fact for which they should be deeply grateful. 18-wheeler driver Carson Wade had the Dallas to Albuquerque route down to a science after 15 years hauling the same stretch of interstate. He knew every truck stop, every dangerous curve, and every spot where state troopers like to hide with radar guns. He could practically drive it blindfolded. Not that he ever would. Carson was old school professional. With a spotless safety record he took immense pride in. Tonight's run was routine. A trailer full of electronics components headed west through the Texas Panhandle. The interstate stretched empty ahead, most civilian traffic having settled for the night. It was just after 2 a.m. when Carson's CB radio crackled to life. Breaker 19 for that eastbound Peterbilt around mile marker 24. You got your ears on. Come back. Carson frowned. He was westbound, not eastbound, and driving a Kenworth, not a Peterbilt. Still, he was the only truck he'd seen for the past 30 miles. This is westbound Kenworth at 2. You might have your directions crossed. Come back, Carson replied, the familiar CB static filling his cab. After a moment of silence, the radio crackled again. The voice that came through was different from the first, higher-pitched, almost childlike, but with a strange echo quality that raised the hair on Carson's arms. Negative, driver. We see you plain as day. Eastbound Peterbilt, red cab. pulling a white refrigerated trailer. You're headed straight for it. Come back. Carson checked his mirrors instinctively, seeing nothing but empty highway behind him. Ahead, the road remained clear for miles, visibility excellent under the full moon. There's no eastbound traffic anywhere near me, Carson replied. Who am I talking to? What's your 20? The CB burst with overlapping voices, at least a dozen different speakers trying to transmit simultaneously. Carson caught fragments. He doesn't know, happened 50 years. Warn him before. Same crash repeating. Then silence fell abruptly, leaving only the soft hiss of static. Carson reached to adjust the squelch when a single voice cut through. Crystal clear despite the lack of the usual CB distortion. This is Jimbo Wade. Carson, son, you need to pull over right now. Carson's foot slipped off the accelerator involuntarily. Jimbo Wade had been his father's handler. A father who had died in a head-on collision with an eastbound refrigerated truck on this very stretch of highway in 1973. 30 years before Carson had even gotten his commercial license. Who is that? Carson demanded, cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. That's not funny. It's Dad, the voice replied with such perfect inflection that Carson could almost smell his father's cigarettes and aftershave. I'm trying to help you. What's happening tonight already happened before. It's why I never came home that Christmas. Carson's hands trembled on the wheel. He'd been 4 years old when his father died, leaving only faded photographs and second-hand story. The voice on the CB sounded exactly like the recorded message on an old answering machine tape his mother had saved. The only audio of his father Carson had ever heard. You're approaching mile marker 247. His father's voice continued. In 2 minutes, an eastbound Peterbilt is going to cross the median. The driver fell asleep. 37 people have tried to warn him over the years. None of us got through. This isn't real, Carson whispered. But he found himself easing his rig toward the shoulder nonetheless. We're all still here, son. Everyone who died on this stretch. The CB frequency is the only way we can reach through. Pulled my first long haul on this road in '62. Died here in '73. And been trying to warn others ever since. As if to confirm this impossible claim, the CB erupted with a chorus of voices offering details no stranger could know. The name of Carson's childhood dog, the song his mother used to sing him to sleep, the hidden compartment Jimbo had built into his truck where he kept an emergency fund, details Carson himself had only learned about after his mother's death. You need to stop completely, son, Jimbo's voice urged. What you're about to see isn't physical yet. It's the echo of what happened, what keeps happening, like a recording replaying over and over. But if you're on the road when it reaches this point in the playback, Carson pulled his rig to a complete stop on the shoulder. Emergency flashers blinking steadily in the Texas night. He watched his side mirror, half expecting to see highway patrol lights approaching to check on him. Instead, he saw headlights, bright and impossibly fast, appearing suddenly behind him, though there had been no traffic moments before. The headlights belonged to a red Peterbilt pulling a white refrigerated trailer, speeding eastbound on the westbound lanes. Carson instinctively grabbed for his CB mic. Eastbound truck in westbound lane. You're going the wrong way. His radio replied only with static. The phantom Peterbilt roared past Carson's parked truck, missing him by inches. In the split second it passed, Carson caught a glimpse of the driver. A middle-aged man nodding forward, eyes closed, head bobbing with fatigue. He never wakes up in time, his father's voice said softly through the CB. Roughly a quarter mile ahead, a second set of headlights appeared. Another truck materialized out of nowhere. A blue Kenworth that looked like a model from the early. The two phantom vehicles converged at highway speed, and Carson braced for the impact. But at the moment of collision, both trucks simply vanished, leaving the highway empty once more. That's how it happened, Jimbo's voice explained. But those of us stuck here, we've learned we can sometimes reach through, especially to our own blood. You're the first one who's ever heard us clearly enough to stop. Dad. Carson managed, his voice breaking. Are you trapped here? The CB crackled with soft static before his father replied. Not trapped, son, just unfinished. Each of us waiting for something different. For me, it was knowing you were safe. For others, well, everyone who dies suddenly leaves something undone. Carson spent the rest of the night parked on the shoulder, talking with his father and the others. A community of voices from across 6 decades of highway fatalities, all existing in some liminal space that overlapped with CB radio frequencies in the dead of night. As dawn approached, the voices began to fade. Signals always weakest at daybreak, Jimbo explained. But now that you've heard us once, you'll be able to find us again. Channel 23. It's not on the standard CB band. It exists only out here. Only for us. Will you move on now? Carson asked, not entirely sure what he meant. His father chuckled, the sound bringing back a flash of childhood memory. Not yet. Still got work to do. Still got drivers to warn. But knowing you heard me, that helps. That mattered. As the first rays of sunlight crested the horizon, the CB gave one final burst of static before falling silent. Carson sat for a long while watching the empty highway where he'd seen his father die in an accident that had happened decades before. When he finally pulled back onto the interstate, Carson drove with a new awareness of the CB mounted in his dash. He completed his delivery in Albuquerque, then requested a route change from his dispatcher, specifically asking for the Dallas run whenever possible. Other drivers began to notice that Carson Wade always slowed down around mile marker 20. Some asked him about it, but he never explained. He simply advised new drivers to keep their CBs tuned to channel 23 when driving that stretch after midnight. You probably won't hear anything, he would say with an enigmatic smile. But somewhere, someone is listening for you, and if you're ever in trouble out there, call out. You might be surprised who answered. I swear we've passed that same barn 3 times now, Dana said, peering through the passenger window at the weathered red structure slowly collapsing in on itself. That's impossible, her husband Michael replied, though uncertainty had crept into his voice. We've been following the detour signs consistently. What should have been a simple 4-hour drive from Chicago to Dana's parents' house in rural Wisconsin had turned into a 6-hour odyssey thanks to construction closing the main highway. The orange detour signs had directed them onto progressively smaller roads, each turn taking them deeper into farmland that felt increasingly isolated. Now, as afternoon faded toward evening, they found themselves on a single-lane gravel road with no other traffic, no cellular service, and a growing sense that something wasn't right. The GPS hasn't updated our position in over an hour, Dana noted, tapping the screen of her phone. The blue dot indicating their location remained frozen on a road that, according to the map, should have reconnected with the highway miles ago. Michael slowed the car as they approached yet another detour sign, this one directing them onto an even narrower dirt track leading into a dense stand of trees. The sign looked official enough, the same orange diamond with black lettering as all the others, but something about its placement felt off, as though it had been positioned specifically for them. I don't like this, Michael said, stopping the car completely. Let's turn around, find a gas station, and ask for directions. As if in response to his decision, the engine sputtered and died. Michael turned the key several times, but the car remained stubbornly silent. Perfect, Dana muttered, unbuckling her seatbelt. I'll check under the hood. As Dana examined the engine with the flashlight from her phone, Michael stepped out to stretch his legs. The silence struck him immediately. No distant traffic noise, no birds, not even the rustle of wind through the surrounding cornfield. The air felt dense and still, as though they were encased in amber. Michael, Dana called, her voice tight with concern. You need to see this. He joined her at the front of the car. Dana held up a thick vine that she had pulled from the engine compartment. It was green and actively growing, its tendrils wrapped intimately around the spark plugs and battery connections. This is impossible, Michael whispered, touching the plant. It was warm and pulsed slightly under his fingertips, almost like it had a heartbeat. We just had the car serviced last week. A sudden movement in the cornfield caught their attention. The stalks parted slightly, revealing what appeared to be a child watching them from between the rows. Before either could call out, the figure retreated deeper into the field. "Did you see that?" Dana asked. "Someone's out there." "Hello?" Michael called. "We could use some help." His voice seemed to drop dead just feet from his lips, as though the air itself swallowed the sound. The fading daylight took on an amber quality that made the surrounding landscape look like an old photograph. Colors slightly wrong, contrasts too sharp. With the car disabled, they had little choice but to follow the detour sign into the wood. Michael removed their overnight bag from the trunk while Dana tried one last time to get a signal on her phone. "Maybe there's a house through these trees," she suggested without much conviction. The dirt track led them deeper into the woods, which seemed to grow more primeval with every step. The trees here were impossibly old, their massive trunks covered in moss that glowed with faint bioluminescence as the last natural light faded. After walking for 20 minutes, they emerged from the forest into what appeared to be a small town. Though town wasn't quite the right word. It was more like a collection of buildings from different eras haphazardly assembled around a central square. A clapboard general store that could have been from the 1880s stood beside a 1950s-style diner, which itself neighbored a modern gas station. Yet all the buildings shared the same weathered, slightly unreal quality, like elaborate movie sets. Most unsettling was the complete absence of people. Every building was lit from within. Warm yellow light spilling from windows onto empty sidewalks. A vintage pickup truck idled in front of the diner, its driver's door hanging open. Radio softly playing a song neither Michael nor Dana recognized. "What is this place?" Dana whispered, instinctively reaching for Michael's hand. "Welcome to Crossing," said a voice behind them. They turned to find an elderly man in overalls watching them with an expression of gentle amusement. His face was deeply lined, but his eyes were bright and alert in a way that suggested he was younger than his appearance indicated. "I'm Walter," he continued. "Caretaker, you might say. You folks took the detour, I see." "Yes," Michael said cautiously. "We're trying to get back to the highway. Our car broke down about a mile back." Walter nodded as if this was entirely expected. "Always does. Something about the boundary doesn't agree with combustion engines or electronic." He gestured to Dana's phone, which now displayed a blank screen despite having shown nearly full battery minutes earlier. "What boundary?" Dana asked. "Where exactly are we?" Walter considered her question with a tilt of his head. "Crossing isn't exactly a where, ma'am. It's more of a when, or perhaps a what might have been." Before they could question this cryptic response, the town square came alive with sudden activity. People appeared where moments before there had been none, emerging from buildings, walking along sidewalks, driving vintage vehicles through the street. They moved with purpose, but wore expressions of mild confusion, as though perpetually trying to remember something important. "They don't see us," Walter explained, watching Michael's startled reaction when a woman walked directly through his outstretched hand. "Not yet, anyway. They're still finding their way here." "Who are they?" Dana asked, her scientific mind struggling to process what her eyes were seeing. "Travelers, like yourselves, took a wrong turn somewhere along the way." Walter's expression turned contemplative. "Some took a detour off a highway, others made different choices. A career path not followed. A relationship abandoned, a moment of courage not seized. All roads lead to crossing eventually, for those who've strayed too far from their intended path." A horrible understanding began to dawn on Michael. "Are you saying we're—" Walter laughed, the sound oddly comforting. No, nothing so dramatic. You just took a detour into a place that exists in the spaces between choices. Happens every year around this time. What locals up the road call detour season. The veil gets thin, the signs appear, and folks like you find their way here. "How do we leave?" Dana demanded, her initial fear giving way to determination. Most don't, Walter said simply. They acclimate. Join the other. Build a life that resembles the one they left behind. Without ever quite remembering what that was, he gestured toward the diner, where through the windows they could now see people who looked suspiciously like other travelers. Their clothing from different decades, their expressions holding that same subtle disorientation. But you too, Walter continued, studying them intently. You still recognize the wrongness of this place. That means you haven't crossed over completely. Your path is still clear in your minds. Our path was to Dana's parents' house for Thanksgiving, Michael insisted. We just needed to get around some construction. Walter's eyes twinkled. Are you sure about that? The detour signs only appear to those already deviating from their true course. Dana and Michael exchanged uncomfortable glances. Their marriage had been strained for months. This trip to her parents, an attempt to recapture normalcy after Michael's emotional affair with a coworker, and Dana's subsequent retreat into her work. Neither had been truly committed to repairing what was broken between them. What do we need to do? Dana asked quietly. Walter pointed toward a narrow covered bridge at the far end of town. A structure that seemed to fade in and out of visibility depending on how directly one looked at it. The boundary works both ways. Cross that bridge before midnight, and you'll find yourselves back on your proper road. He hesitated before adding, but you have to cross together with clear intention. Those who waver often find themselves right back here, wondering how they took a wrong turn again. As they thanked Walter and turned toward the bridge, he called after them, one more thing. What you see on the other side of the bridge will be your moment of deviation. The point where your path first began to diverge, that's your only chance to correct course. The walk to the bridge took longer than it should have, distance seeming to stretch and contract with each step. The semi-transparent structure creaked beneath their feet as they stepped onto its weathered planks. Through the wooden slats, they could see not water but swirling mist punctuated by brief glimpses of other places, other moments. Halfway across, the bridge around them dissolved, leaving them standing in their own living room from 3 years earlier. They witnessed themselves in the midst of the argument that had created the first significant fracture in their marriage. A fight about Michael's increasing emotional distance following Dana's third miscarriage. In this memory made manifest, they watched themselves retreat to opposite ends of their home, rather than face the shared pain. With the clarity of observers, they could now see how that single moment of choosing separation over connection had set them on a path of gradual estrangement, culminating in the hollow marriage they now inhabited. The vision wavered around them as midnight approached. Dana reached for Michael's hand. I see it now, she whispered. This is where we detoured from each other. Michael nodded, his throat tight. What do? We choose differently this time, Dana said. We turn toward each other, not away. As they spoke these words with clear intention, the vision collapsed around them. A rushing sensation overtook them, like being pulled backward through a tunnel at impossible speed. When the world stabilized, they found themselves sitting in their car, engine running, GPS indicating they were just a mile from the highway. The detour sign that had led them off the main road was nowhere to be seen. Did that really happen? Michael asked, his voice unsteady. Dana looked at her phone, which showed the correct time and date. Only 30 minutes had passed since they had first followed the detour sign. Not the hours it had seemed. I don't know, she admitted, but I remember everything. The town, Walter, the bridge, our living room from 3 years ago. Michael's hands tightened on the steering wheel. I remember too. They drove in silence for several minutes before Dana spoke again. Whether it was real or not, I saw something true back there. About us, about where we lost our way. Michael nodded slowly. Me too. They rejoined the highway as snow began to fall. Light flurries that danced in their headlights. Neither mentioned the fact that the weather report had predicted clear skies, or that the construction that had supposedly caused the detour was nowhere to be seen. 3 days later, on their drive back to Chicago, they passed the turnoff where the detour sign had been. Though both searched the roadside carefully, there was no sign, no gravel road, only an unbroken line of trees. Yet in the distance, visible for just a moment through a gap in the forest, they glimpsed what might have been a weathered red barn. The same one they had passed 3 times on a road that may never have existed, except in the space between choices.
3 more miles to the Echo Lane bed and breakfast, Meredith announced, reading from her phone. Reviews say it's charmingly authentic and a perfect time capsule of 1950s Americana. Her husband Elliot nodded absently, focused on navigating the rental car along the narrow coastal road. Their 15th anniversary vacation had begun with a canceled flight and a hastily rented car, forcing them to drive the final leg of their journey to Maine's remote coastline. Now, with night falling and fog rolling in from the Atlantic, Elliot was grateful they'd managed to book last-minute accommodations. "Did you notice we haven't passed another car for almost an hour?" he asked, peering through the thickening mist. The rental car's headlights seemed unusually dim, barely penetrating the gray wall ahead. "The GPS says we're on the right track," Meredith replied, though doubt crept into her voice as her phone's signal bars disappeared. Though the map just went blank. Elliot slowed the car as they approached a weathered wooden sign partially obscured by overgrown vines. "Echo Lane. Next right." The narrow turnoff would have been easy to miss without the sign. As they followed the unpaved road through dense forest, both felt an increasing sense of isolation. The trees pressed close on either side, branches occasionally scraping against the car windows like fingernails on glass. "Are you sure about this place?" Elliot asked. "We could turn back, try to find something in the last town we passed." Meredith checked her phone again. No signal, and the battery had inexplicably drained to 15% despite being fully charged an hour earlier. "Let's at least check it out," she said. "We've come this far." The forest abruptly gave way to a clearing where a large Victorian house stood silhouetted against the twilight sky. The 3-story structure featured ornate gingerbread trim, a wraparound porch, and a distinctive turret room facing the distant, unseen ocean. Warm yellow light shone from several windows, promising comfort after the increasingly eerie drive. A hand-painted sign confirmed they had arrived at the Echo Lane bed and breakfast. As they parked beside the only other vehicle, a perfectly maintained 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, Elliot noted how the fog seemed to encircle the property like a protective moat, thick at the perimeter but oddly absent near the house itself. The front door opened before they could knock, revealing a smiling elderly woman in a floral dress that Meredith immediately recognized as vintage rather than reproduction. "Mr. and Mrs. Weber, we've been expecting you," the woman said warmly. "I'm Margaret Pendleton. Welcome to Echo Lane." As they stepped into the foyer, both Meredith and Elliot were struck by the interior's perfect preservation of mid-century aesthetics. Every piece of furniture, every fixture and decoration appeared to be authentic 1950s pieces, maintained in pristine condition. "Your place is amazing," Meredith commented, running her hand over a genuine Formica dining table. "It really is like stepping back in time." Margaret beamed with pleasure. Echo Lane exists in its own little pocket of history. Nothing here has changed since. Something in her tone suggested this was more statement of fact than proud boast. She showed them to their room on the 2nd floor. A spacious chamber dominated by a 4-poster bed and featuring a bathroom with original pastel-colored fixture. Everything was meticulously clean yet undeniably old. "Dinner will be served in 30 minutes, Margaret informed them. "My husband Thomas is quite the cook. We have 3 other guests staying with us this evening. They're so looking forward to meeting you." After she left, Elliot tried the vintage rotary phone on the nightstand, confirming his suspicion that it was actually connected and functional. Meredith, meanwhile, discovered her cell phone had died completely. "This place is certainly committed to its theme," Elliot remarked, opening the closet to find wooden hangers and a pair of complimentary robes that looked brand new yet were styled like those from 60 years earlier. "I'm not sure it's a theme," Meredith replied quietly, looking out their window at the fog that now completely surrounded the property, obscuring any view of the driveway they'd arrived on. "Did you notice there's not a single modern object anywhere?" not even smoke detectors or exit signs. Dinner was served in a formal dining room beneath a crystal chandelier that cast warm light over the assembled guests. Besides Margaret and her husband Thomas, a tall, slender man with brilliant hair and a bow tie, there were 3 other people seated at the table. James and Catherine Morrison introduced themselves as a couple from Boston, celebrating their anniversary just as Meredith and Elliot were. They appeared to be in their early 30s and were dressed in clothing that, like Margaret's, seemed genuinely vintage rather than reproduction. The third guest was Dr. Eleanor Reese, a poised woman who explained she was a professor of literature, taking a sabbatical to work on her book. She wore cat-eye glasses and a cardigan set that complemented her perfectly styled hair. The meal was elaborate and delicious, though Meredith noted that the ingredients and preparation were consistent with 1950s American cuisine. A gelatin mold with suspended fruit, crown roast of pork, and dishes heavy with mayonnaise and cream sauce. The conversation flowed pleasantly, if somewhat formally, with topics ranging from books to travel to general observations about life. What was notably absent from the discussion was any reference to current events, technology, or popular culture from after the late 19th. When Elliot casually mentioned their flight cancellation, the table fell momentarily silent before Thomas smoothly redirected the conversation. After dinner, their hosts invited everyone to the parlor for coffee and dessert. As they settled into the vintage furniture, Meredith whispered to Elliot, "Have you noticed that nobody has mentioned what year it is?" Elliot nodded slightly. His earlier unease returned. He'd been observing the other guests carefully and had noticed subtle inconsistencies in their behavior, moments when they seemed to be performing rather than naturally existing in the space. When Catherine Morrison excused herself to use the powder room, Meredith followed, catching up with her in the hallway. "Catherine, can I ask you something? How long have you and James been staying here?" Catherine's smile remained fixed, but a flicker of something warning fast behind her eyes. "We arrived yesterday," she said mechanically. "We're celebrating our 5th anniversary. And what year were you married?" Meredith pressed. Catherine's smile faltered. She glanced down the hallway toward the parlor, then leaned closer to Meredith. 1952. "But that's not, that doesn't." She stopped, confusion clouding her features. "I need to get back to James." She hurried away, leaving Meredith standing alone in the hallway. Through an open door, Meredith glimpsed what appeared to be an office. Inside, on a desk calendar, she could clearly see the date, June 17, 1957. When she returned to the parlor, the conversation had taken on a strained quality. Thomas was describing local attractions with the practiced ease of someone who had delivered the same information countless times. As he spoke, Meredith noticed a pattern. Every few minutes, all 3 guests would simultaneously touch their throats, as if checking for something. At precisely 10 o'clock, Margaret announced that coffee service was concluded. Their hosts and the other guests bid Elliot and Meredith good night, with perfect synchronized politeness before retreating to their respective rooms. Back in their bedroom, Elliot immediately checked the window, confirming that the fog still encircled the property like a wall. "Something is very wrong here," he said quietly. "I think we should leave tonight." "I'm not sure we can," Meredith replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did you see the way the others were touching their necks? Look." She pulled back the collar of her blouse to reveal a thin, almost invisible line encircling her throat, like a scar, but one that hadn't been there when they arrived. Elliot's hand went to his own neck, finding an identical mark. "What is this? What's happening to us?" A soft knock at their door interrupted their growing panic. When Elliot opened it, they found Dr. Eleanor Reese standing in the hallway, her composed demeanor now replaced with barely contained urgency. "May I come in?" she asked, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "We don't have much time." Once inside, with the door closed, Eleanor's carefully constructed 1950s persona seemed to dissolve. She ran her hands through her perfectly coiffed hair, disrupting its structured waves. "You've noticed, haven't you?" she said. "The inconsistencies, the fog, The marks. She touched her own neck, where the same thin line was visible beneath her collar. "What is this place?" Meredith demanded. "What's happening to us?" Eleanor sank onto the edge of the bed. Echo Lane exists in a loop. Specifically, the day Margaret and Thomas Pendleton murdered their 5 overnight guests before taking their own lives. The blunt revelation hung in the air like a physical presence. "That's impossible," Elliot finally said, though his protest lacked conviction. "I thought so too," Eleanor replied. "I was a real professor once. I came here researching local folklore about a haunted bed and breakfast. That was..." She paused, calculating. "That was 4 loops ago for me." "Loops?" Meredith echoed. "Every night at midnight, time resets to the morning of June. The Pendletons greet new guests. Always the same types. A married couple celebrating an anniversary, another married couple who serve as witnesses, and a single person who becomes the chronicler. That's me this time." "But we just booked this place yesterday," Elliot protested. "On our phone, there was a website." Eleanor shook her head. "Echo Lane reaches out when it needs new players. It creates whatever modern lure is necessary. The Morrisons have been here for decades, though they don't realize it. They think they arrived yesterday just like you do." "Why?" Meredith asked. "Why is this happening?" "The Pendletons believe they're saving their guests," Eleanor explained. "In the original 1957 incident, Thomas became convinced that nuclear war was imminent. He and Margaret decided to rescue their guests from the coming apocalypse by securing them in this perfect moment in time." She stood and moved to the window, looking out at the unnatural fog. "The murders always happen the same way. Poison in the late-night tea, served at precisely 11. By midnight, everyone is dead, and the cycle begins again. New guests arrive, but the Morrisons and I remain. Our memories reset, our roles fixed." "How do you remember if your memory resets?" Elliot asked. Eleanor turned back from the window, pulling a small notebook from her pocket. "I write myself notes and hide them where I'll find them. Each cycle I recover a little more knowledge. I've learned that the mark," she touched her throat again, "appears on those who are becoming permanent parts of the loop. Once it completely circles your neck, you can never leave." Meredith's fingers traced the line on her own neck, finding it had extended since she last checked. "How do we escape?" "The cycle can be broken, but only during the transition minute, the moment between 11:59 p.m. and midnight. During that minute, the fog barrier weakens. If you can cross the property line before the cycle resets, you can break free." "Why haven't you escaped?" Elliot asked. Eleanor's expression grew somber. "I've tried, many times, but I can never make it through the fog alone. The Pendletons always find me." And now, she pulled down her collar to reveal her scar, a complete circle around her throat. "It's too late for me, but not for you. Your marks are still incomplete." She checked her watch, an authentic 1950s timepiece. "It's 10:40. At 11:15, Margaret will bring a tray of tea to your room. Decline it. At 11:50, meet me by the kitchen door. It's the shortest path to the property line." After Eleanor left, Meredith and Elliot quickly packed their few belongings. True to Eleanor's prediction, Margaret appeared at 11:15 with a silver tea service, her smile never reaching her eyes. "Just a little something to help you sleep," she said, pouring 2 cups of fragrant tea. "We're actually quite tired already," Meredith replied, feigning a yawn. "But thank you." Something dark flashed behind Margaret's eyes, but her smile remained fixed. "As you wish. Sleep well." At 11:45, they crept downstairs, finding Eleanor waiting by the kitchen door, as promised. Through the windows, they could see the fog had begun to thin slightly. "We need to time this perfectly," Eleanor whispered. "Too early, and the barrier will be too strong. Too late, and the reset will catch you." They waited in tense silence until Eleanor's watch showed 11:58. "Now," she said, pushing open the door. Run straight for the tree line and don't stop for anything. The three of them burst out into the night, sprinting across the well-kept lawn toward where the driveway disappeared into the fog. The air grew colder as they approached the boundary, the mist swirling around their legs with unnatural intent. Behind them, the house came alive with activity. Lights blazing from every window, doors slamming. Elliot glanced back to see Thomas and Margaret standing on the porch, their forms shifting between human and something else. Something with two long limbs and faces that stretched beyond normal proportions. "Don't look back," Eleanor shouted. "Just run." They hit the fog barrier like a physical wall, the mist clinging to them with surprising resistance. Eleanor pushed ahead, creating a path that Meredith and Elliot followed. The air grew thick, difficult to breathe, filled with whispers and half-heard plea. Meredith's watch beeped the 12 o'clock hour just as they broke through to the other side. Behind them, Eleanor screamed, a sudden cut-off sound. When they turned, she was gone, the fog having closed solid behind them. They stood on the main coastal road, their rental car parked neatly at the shoulder where no turnoff was visible. Where Echo Lane should have been, there was only unbroken forest. The drive back to civilization was conducted in shocked silence. Only when they reached their originally planned hotel did Meredith finally speak. "Do you think she knew?" she asked quietly. "Eleanor, do you think she knew she couldn't escape?" Elliot nodded slowly. "I think she sacrificed herself to get us out." In the bathroom mirror that night, they discovered the marks on their necks had faded to nearly invisible lines, present but incomplete. A reminder of how close they had come to being trapped forever. 3 months later, a package arrived at their home without a return address. Inside was Eleanor's notebook, its pages filled with detailed accounts of dozens of cycles at Echo Lane. The final entry, dated the night of their escape, read simply, "The cycle requires a chronicler. I accept this role willingly so others may escape. If you're reading this, remember me not as trapped but as finally having found my purpose." Meredith and Elliot never returned to Maine, but each year on June 17, they receive a postcard from a bed and breakfast called Echo Lane, inviting them to revisit. The cards always bear the same message in elegant handwriting. "The kettle's always on, and time stands still just for you." They burn each card immediately, but sometimes in their dreams they find themselves back in that perfect 1950s prison, running through fog that thickens with each step, never quite reaching the road beyond. "You can't miss it," the gas station attendant had said when Austin asked about the shortcut. "Route 77 cuts 40 minutes off your drive to Springfield. Locals call it the Red Mile on account of the clay soil that turns the asphalt kinda reddish in the rain." Austin thanked him and returned to his car where his 9-year-old daughter Emma waited, absorbed in her tablet game. They were running behind schedule for his ex-wife's wedding, a tense situation made worse by the unexpected traffic detour that had pushed them 2 hours behind schedule. "We're taking a shortcut, kiddo," he announced, pulling back onto the road. "Should get us there in time for you to be the flower girl after all." Emma looked up briefly. "Mom's going to be mad if we're late." "We won't be," Austin promised, spotting the turnoff for Route 70. The narrow 2-lane road immediately plunged between dense walls of oak and maple trees, their autumn foliage creating a tunnel of vibrant red and gold. The road's surface did indeed have a reddish cast, though it hadn't rained recently. Austin found himself wondering why such an apparently well-maintained shortcut wasn't marked on his GPS. Still, the gas station attendant had been specific about the route, and the road signs clearly confirmed they were on. They had been driving for about 10 minutes when Emma suddenly set down her tablet. "Dad," she said quietly, "there's someone walking on the road." Austin slowed the car as they approached a solitary figure trudging along the shoulder, a young woman in jeans and a red flannel shirt, thumb extended in the universal hitchhiker's gesture. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and a battered backpack hung from one shoulder. "Should we stop?" Emma asked. Austin hesitated. He had a strict policy against picking up hitchhikers, especially with his daughter in the car. Yet something about the young woman's posture conveyed a desperation that tugged at him. Plus, there was something oddly familiar about her. "We probably shouldn't," he began, but found himself pulling over anyway. The young woman jogged up to the passenger window, which Emma rolled down. Up close, she appeared to be in her early 20s, with a face that struck Austin as hauntingly familiar, though he couldn't place why. "Thanks for stopping," she said, slightly out of breath. "I've been walking for hours. No one ever stops on the Red Mile." "Where are you headed?" Austin asked. "Springfield," she replied. "I'm late for a wedding." The coincidence was startling enough that Austin momentarily forgot his misgivings. "That's where we're going too. My daughter's the flower girl." The young woman's gaze shifted to Emma, her expression softening. "May I ride with you? I promise I'm not dangerous." Emma nodded enthusiastically before Austin could respond. With a sigh of resignation, he unlocked the door. "You can sit in the back." As they continued down Route 77, Austin watched the hitchhiker in his rearview mirror. She stared out the window with an intensity that seemed odd, as though cataloging every tree they passed. "I'm Austin," he offered. "This is my daughter Emma." "I know," the woman said softly, then quickly added, "I mean, nice to meet you. I'm Claire. Are you a friend of the bride or groom?" Austin asked, trying to place why she seemed familiar. Perhaps she was one of his ex-wife's friends whom he'd met at some point. "Neither," Claire replied. "I was close to the bride's daughter." Emma turned in her seat. "That's me, but I don't remember you." Claire smiled sadly. "We haven't met yet, but we would have." The strange phrasing made Austin glance sharply in the rearview mirror. "What do you mean by that?" Claire leaned forward, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "Austin, I need you to listen carefully. Route 77 isn't a normal road. It's a temporal fold, a place where different time frames overlap. Right now, we're traveling through October 12th, but not just this year's October." "That doesn't make any sense," Austin said, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. "Dad," Emma interrupted, pointing through the windshield. "Look at the trees." Austin had been so focused on their strange passenger that he hadn't noticed how the foliage around them had changed. The vibrant autumn colors had faded to the deep green of summer, then shifted again to the bare branches of winter, before cycling back to the fresh buds of spring, all within the span of a few hundred yards. "What you're seeing is Route 77 passing through different seasons of the same day, October 12th, across multiple years," Claire explained. "The road exists in a state of temporal flux, connecting moments from different times that share specific characteristics." "That's impossible," Austin insisted, though the evidence before his eyes suggested otherwise. "I thought so too once," Claire said. "The first time I traveled this road was 5 years from now in your timeline. I was late for a wedding too, the same wedding you're headed to today." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a creased photograph, passing it to Emma. The girl gasped as she examined it. The photo showed an older version of herself, perhaps 14 or 15, standing beside the young woman who called herself Claire. They wore matching bridesmaid dresses in a familiar shade of lavender, the same color Austin's ex-wife had chosen for the wedding party. "This is from my mom's 5-year vow renewal ceremony," Claire continued. "You'll be 14 then, Emma. We become friends because we're the only ones who hate the dresses." Austin's mind reeled as impossible implications cascaded through his thoughts. "If what you're saying is true, which is insane, why are you here? Why now?" Claire's expression darkened. "Because in approximately 12 minutes at a bend in the road 5 miles ahead, you're going to lose control of your car. In my timeline, both of you died in that accident." A cold weight settled in Austin's stomach. "That's why you look familiar. You have her eyes." He gestured toward Emma. Claire nodded slowly. "Elizabeth, your ex-wife, remarried today as planned, then adopted me 2 years later. I became the daughter she needed after losing Emma." Emma, who had been unusually quiet during this exchange, suddenly spoke up. "Is that why you're here?" To save us? Yes, Claire said. The Red Mile appears to certain travelers who have a strong connection to events that happened along its path. It took me 3 attempts to find the right October. Austin's scientific mind grappled with the impossibility of their situation, but he couldn't deny the evidence of the time-shifting foliage outside, nor the photograph that clearly showed his daughter at an age she hadn't yet reached. What causes the accident? He asked, pragmatism overriding disbelief. A logging truck loses its load around a blind curve. In my timeline, you swerved to avoid it and went into the ravine on the right side of the road. Claire leaned forward urgently. We need to slow down now. The accident happens at the mile marker 43, which is coming up soon. Austin eased his foot off the accelerator, bringing the car down to a cautious 30 miles. As they approached a curve in the road, Claire tensed visibly. This is it, she whispered. When you come around this bend, the truck will be there. Don't swerve right, there's a drop-off hidden by those trees. If you have to swerve, go left into the ditch. The car crawled around the curve, all 3 occupants holding their breath. Just as Claire had predicted, a massive logging truck appeared, its driver fighting to control the vehicle, as logs broke free from their restraints, tumbling onto the road, directly in their path.
Time seemed to slow as Austin processed the danger. His instinct was indeed to swerve right, away from the oncoming truck. Claire's warning flashed in his mind at the critical moment, and he wrenched the wheel left instead. Their car bounced roughly into the drainage ditch running alongside the road, the impact deploying the airbags. For several moments, the only sound was the settling of the car's frame and the distant crash of logs hitting the asphalt. Then Emma's voice, small but steady. "Dad? Are you okay?" Austin turned to see his daughter, shaken but unharmed, already unbuckling her seatbelt. "I'm fine, sweetheart." "Claire, are you?" The back seat was empty. They climbed out of the car to find the logging truck stopped further down the road, its driver running back toward them. Of Claire there was no sign, not even indentations in the back seat where she had been sitting moments before. The only evidence of her existence was the photograph still clutched in Emma's hand. As they waited for emergency services, Austin noticed that the road no longer had its distinctive reddish tint. When the highway patrol officer arrived, Austin mentioned they had been taking Route 77. Route 77, the officer repeated, looking confused. "There's no Route 77 around here. This is County Road 1 is." Austin and Emma exchanged baffled looks. Emma unfolded the photograph again, only to find the image had changed. It still showed her at age 14, but now she stood alone in the lavender bridesmaid dress, smiling at the camera with no Claire beside her. Yet when Emma turned the photo over, there was a message written in unfamiliar handwriting. "Some paths are meant to be changed. Live your life, Emma. I'll find mine." They made it to the wedding after all, albeit late and somewhat disheveled. During the reception, Austin found himself watching his daughter with new awareness, seeing not just the 9-year-old flower girl, but glimpses of the teenager she would become, the young woman she might grow into. A future that had almost been erased on a road that apparently never existed. Years later, on the night before Emma's 14th birthday, Austin discovered a red flannel shirt he didn't recognize, laid out with her clothes for her mother's vow renewal ceremony. The next, when he asked about it, Emma simply smiled and said, "It's for a friend I'm going to meet." Austin never drove that stretch of County Road 1 again, but local legends persist about a shortcut that sometimes appears to travelers in desperate need, a mysterious stretch of reddish asphalt, where the seasons change every few hundred yards, and where occasionally, if the circumstances are just right, you might encounter a hitchhiker who knows more about your future than you do. They call it the Red Mile, though it appears on no official maps. Those who have traveled it say the road doesn't just connect places, it connects moments, possibilities, the paths not taken, and the ones yet to be found. Daniel Wright had been driving for coastal rideshare for nearly 8 months, long enough to have settled into comfortable routines.
but not so long that he'd grown cynical about the work. He enjoyed the flexible hours that allowed him to pursue his true passion for photography, and the ever-changing parade of passengers provided a constant source of interesting conversations and human observation. This Tuesday night had been particularly slow, with steady rain discouraging all but the most determined travelers. It was nearing midnight when his app pinged with a pickup request from a location Daniel didn't immediately recognize: Harborview Road, a spot on the outskirts of town that butted up against the abandoned naval station. He almost declined the ride. The decommissioned base had been closed for nearly 20 years and was now little more than a collection of decaying buildings surrounded by chain-link fence. As far as Daniel knew, there weren't any residential properties out that way, which made the pickup location unusual. Curiosity won out over caution. Daniel accepted the request, noting that the passenger's name was listed simply as M and their destination was the Shoreview Hotel downtown. A reasonable enough drop-off point. The rain intensified as Daniel drove toward the pickup location, his windshield wipers struggling to maintain visibility. The last streetlight disappeared half a mile before his GPS announced, "You have arrived at your destination." Daniel peered through the rain-streaked windshield, seeing nothing but the crumbling entrance to the naval station on one side and dense woods on the other. He was about to contact the passenger through the app when his headlights illuminated a figure standing motionless at the side of the road. A woman in a dark blue raincoat, hood pulled up against the downpour. She approached as Daniel pulled over, sliding into the back seat with a rush of cold, damp air. The interior light revealed a woman in her mid-30s with pale skin and dark hair cut in a severe bob. Despite the rain, her face appeared dry and her raincoat showed no signs of being wet. "Shoreview Hotel," Daniel confirmed, meeting her eyes briefly in the rearview mirror. The woman nodded. "Thank you for coming all the way out here. Not many drivers would." There was something odd about her voice, a slight accent Daniel couldn't place, or perhaps a formality to her speech that seemed out of step with casual conversation. "No problem," he replied, pulling back onto the empty road. "What brings you out to the old naval station at this hour?" "Memory," she answered after a pause just long enough to be noticeable. "Today marks an anniversary of sorts." Daniel nodded, respecting what seemed like a personal matter. They drove in silence for several minutes, the rhythmic swish of the wipers and the steady drumming of rain on the roof filling the car. It was the woman who eventually broke the silence. "You're relatively new to this area, aren't you?" The question startled Daniel. He hadn't mentioned anything about himself, and his profile on the rideshare app didn't include personal details beyond his name and rating. "Been here about a year," he admitted. "How did you know?" "Locals avoid Harborview Road after dark," she replied matter-of-factly, "especially on rain-slicked nights like this one." Something in her tone raised the hairs on the back of Daniel's neck. "Is there a reason for that?" The woman leaned forward slightly, her face appearing in his rearview mirror. In the dim light, her features seemed sharper than before, her eyes reflecting the dashboard lights with unusual intensity. 20 years ago tonight, a naval officer drove his car off Harborview Road into the bay. They found the vehicle 3 days later, but his body was never recovered. Daniel's hands tightened imperceptibly on the steering wheel. "That's terrible." The official report cited dangerous road conditions and driver error, she continued as if she hadn't heard him. But those who worked with Lieutenant Michael Winters knew he was an exceptionally careful driver who never took risks. The rain suddenly increased in intensity, sheets of water cascading across the windshield faster than the wipers could clear it. Daniel slowed the car, squinting to make out the road ahead. "Some believe there was more to the story," the woman said, her voice dropping to little more than a whisper. The lieutenant had been part of a classified research project at the naval station. The week before his death, he had requested an urgent meeting with his commanding officer, a meeting that never took place. Daniel glanced at his GPS, relieved to see they were nearing the more populated part of town. The atmosphere in the car had grown increasingly tense, though he couldn't articulate exactly why. There was nothing inherently threatening about a local ghost story. Yet something about the woman's manner suggested more than idle conversation. "The project was officially terminated after his death," she continued. "All personnel were reassigned, and within 6 months the entire base was decommissioned, a process that typically takes years. Sounds like the makings of a conspiracy theory, Daniel commented, attempting to lighten the mood. The woman didn't smile. The Shoreview Hotel is up ahead on the right. But before we arrive, I'd like to make a small detour, if you don't mind. Daniel hesitated. Rideshare protocol discouraged unplanned stops or route changes. I should really stick to the app's directions. It's on the way, she insisted. Half a block past the hotel. The old Maritime Museum. It won't take long. Against his better judgment, Daniel nodded. The museum was indeed just past the hotel. A historic building that housed exhibits on the region's naval history. He'd walked past it several times but had never gone inside. As they approached the museum, the rain abruptly ceased, as though someone had turned off a faucet. The sudden silence was almost as startling as the downpour had been. "Pull up to the entrance, please," the woman requested. Daniel complied, stopping before the darkened building. A sign on the door clearly stated that the museum was closed for renovations. "I don't think they're open," he pointed out. "They're expecting me." The woman replied. She made no move to exit the car, instead fixing her gaze on the museum's entrance. "Did you know they acquired the archives from the naval station after it closed? Most materials were classified and sealed, of course, but not everything." Daniel said nothing, increasingly eager for this strange ride to end. 3 weeks ago, a former archivist discovered a box of unlabeled photographs while helping with the renovation. She continued. Among them was a group photo of Project Harbinger personnel. The classified project Lieutenant Winters had been part of. She turned to look directly at Daniel, her eyes now reflecting light that seemed to have no source within the darkened car. The lieutenant appears in that photograph, standing at the end of the back row. Next to him is a woman whose name doesn't appear in any official record, though she's wearing a scientist credentials. From her raincoat pocket, she withdrew a folded piece of paper and handed it to Daniel. He opened it with reluctant curiosity to find a printout of an old black and white photograph, showing 2 rows of people in naval and civilian attire, standing before a sign reading Project Harbinger. "Look at the last person on the right," the woman instructed. Daniel's blood ran cold as he stared at the face of the unknown female scientist. Though the image was grainy and 2 decades old, there was no mistaking his current passenger's distinctive features. "This is impossible," he whispered. "Not impossible," she corrected gently. "Just classified." Project Harbinger was researching temporal displacement, what some might call time travel, though that term oversimplifies the science involved. Daniel looked up from the photograph to find the woman's appearance had subtly changed. Her raincoat now appeared to be a dark blue naval uniform, though when he blinked, it seemed to shift back. "The accident was no accident," she said. "Lieutenant Winters discovered that certain project leaders planned to weaponize our research. He had evidence. He was taking it to the commander when his car went off the road." "Who are you?" Daniel managed to ask. "Dr. Madeline Richards. I was the lieutenant's colleague and fiancée." Her form seemed to flicker slightly, like an image on a poorly tuned television. "And in approximately 7 minutes, I will die in 2003, trying to complete what Michael started." Daniel's mind struggled to process her claim. "If what you're saying is true, if you're really from 20 years ago, why come forward now? Why tell me this?" "Because tonight the cycle can be broken," she replied. "Every 5 years on the anniversary of Michael's death, there's a thinning, for lack of a better term, a brief window when the barriers between then and now become permeable. I've tried before to change what happens, but I've failed each time." She nodded toward the museum. "Inside, there's more than just that photograph. There's a sealed envelope Michael gave me for safekeeping, evidence of what certain military contractors plan to do with our research. In my original timeline, I died trying to deliver it tonight. But the museum renovation has created an opportunity. The archives are temporarily accessible. What do you want from me?" Daniel asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "I need someone from this time to retrieve the envelope. I can't materialize fully enough to do it myself. She reached into her pocket again and produced a key card that looked oddly insubstantial. This will get you into the back entrance. The box is labeled Miscellaneous Administrative Records 2002. The envelope is addressed to Admiral James Harlow. Daniel stared at the key card, but made no move to take it. Why me? Why not go to the authority? The ride-share app doesn't select drivers randomly, Daniel, she said with a sad smile. It's algorithm-based. I needed someone who would accept a late-night pickup in an unusual location. Someone curious by nature. Someone who believes in doing the right thing, even when it's difficult. You hacked the app, he asked, incredulously. No, I created a mathematical probability model in 2003 that predicted which driver would be assigned under specific conditions. She glanced at her watch, an old-fashioned analog model that seemed to be counting backward. We have 5 minutes left in this window. Will you help me? Against all logic and self-preservation instinct, Daniel found himself nodding. He took the key card, which felt cold and slightly unstable in his hand, as though it might dissolve at any moment. The security system is disabled for the renovation, Madeline explained. Go through the delivery entrance, down the hall to the archive room. The box is on the 3rd shelf, east wall. Daniel exited the car, key card clutched tightly in his hand. The night air was unnaturally still after the earlier downpour. Not a single puddle visible on ground that should have been soaked. The museum's delivery entrance was exactly where Madeline had indicated, and the key card worked with a soft click. The archive room was dark but easily navigable by the light of Daniel's phone. He found the box precisely where she had described, and within it, a sealed envelope addressed to Admiral Harlow in neat, angular handwriting. When Daniel returned to the car, Madeline was visibly fading, her form becoming translucent around the edges. She smiled when she saw the envelope in his hand. There's one more thing, she said, her voice now sounding distant despite her presence in the back seat. Deliver this to journalist Miranda Chen at the Bay City Times. Not the police, not the military. They're compromised. Only Miranda. How will I find her? Daniel asked. She'll be at the Lighthouse Cafe tomorrow morning at 9:15. Orange scarf, laptop with a sticker of a cat wearing headphones. Madeline's form flickered violently. I'm out of time. History is counting on you, Daniel. Wait, he called as she faded further. What exactly is in this envelope? The truth, her voice echoed, now seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. About Project Harbinger, about what really happens when you tear holes in time. With those words, she vanished completely, leaving behind only a faint scent of salt water and an indentation in the car's back seat. The raincoat she had been wearing lay neatly folded where she had sat, completely dry despite the earlier downpour. Daniel stared at the empty space, then at the envelope in his hand. The ethical and logical questions warred in his mind. Was this real? Or an elaborate hoax? Was he being manipulated into industrial espionage, or worse? Yet something about Madeline's desperation and the impossibility of what he had witnessed convinced him of her sincerity. Whatever this envelope contained, it had been worth 20 years of effort to deliver. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the Lighthouse Cafe at 9. He spotted Miranda Chen immediately. Orange scarf, cat sticker on her laptop. Exactly as described. When he placed the envelope on her table and explained his strange encounter, she didn't laugh or dismiss him as he had feared. Instead, she carefully opened the envelope, examined its contents with widening eyes, then looked up at Daniel with an expression of stunned realization. Do you have any idea what this is? She asked in a hushed voice. The truth about a time travel project, Daniel ventured. Miranda shook her head slowly. Not just time travel. Dimensional manipulation. According to these documents, Project Harbinger discovered that what we perceive as time travel is actually movement between parallel realities. And they found a way to weaponize it. She spread several photos on the table, showing what appeared to be test sites where sections of landscape had been grotesquely distorted. Buildings twisted into impossible shapes. Vegetation fused with inorganic matter. These tests were conducted on uninhabited islands in the Pacific, she explained, But there were plans to scale up dramatically. The final document was a handwritten letter, signed by Lieutenant Michael Winters, detailing his discovery of plans to use the technology against civilian populations deemed hostile to American interests. 3 days later, Miranda Chen's investigative feature made international headline. Within weeks, a congressional investigation was launched, leading to the indictment of 3 former military contractors and the revelation of decades of classified research conducted without proper oversight. Daniel never encountered Madeline Richards again, though he did find himself regularly driving past the old naval station, especially on rainy nights. The Maritime Museum eventually reopened with a new permanent exhibit about Project Harbinger, including the group photograph showing Lieutenant Winters and Dr. Richards standing side by side. The mystery of Lieutenant Winters' death was officially reopened, and while his body was never recovered, advanced forensic analysis of his salvaged vehicle revealed evidence of tampering with the brake lines, converting a decades-old conspiracy theory into established fact. As for Daniel Wright, he continued his work as a rideshare driver, though he now avoided Harborview Road during rainstorms. His passenger rating remained excellent, with only one recurring oddity. Every year on the anniversary of that strange night, his app would automatically accept a pickup request from Harborview Road. Even when he was offline, the request always appeared under the passenger name and always canceled itself precisely 7 minutes later.